Good afternoon to everyone. Many thanks for the organizer who invited me in this prestigious university in this very lively department. Very happy to be part of this project because I really appreciated the first part of the day, the panel first, and then also the interview, and then also first of all the speak of Andrea's speak. I didn't know the content of the panel and Andrea's speech, but it's really, I really appreciated these two parts of the afternoon because I'm going to give a speech which is in some sense an integration to what you said. So I think it will be interesting to close the circle with this kind of speech that I'm going to do. So I want also to thank Kyle and Adam because they were very, very polite with me in planning this trip here in Philadelphia and in Villanova University. The title of my speech is Immigration, Public Opinion, and Politics at a Crossroads with Global Crisis. In some sense, it is synthesized what I'm going to say. What is the problem? What is the subject that I want to speak about? The core idea is the citizenship. Citizenship is a very important concept. The inclusion of citizens in the political community has always been at the center of the academic interest for different areas of studies. The process refers to the concept of citizenship, which is actually a very complex and multifaceted concept, since it is positioned in a crossroad, at a crossroad with diverse perspectives of studies. Different theoretical perspectives, different theoretical approaches, different interests for research, different focus of research are strictly linked to the concept of citizenship. And citizenship refers to a fundamental issue, like the building of a very high quality democracy, a very good democracy. This is a very important linkage that we have not to forget, because the goal of social equality, but also the real condition of integration and social cohesion inside the community is very important for the idea of democracy. This is an important facet of democracy. Citizenship itself is also related to a more specific, but at the same time, very, very important points, very, very important issues such as the welfare security, such as the gender gap issue, the unbalanced social and territorial development, and so on. But, of course, citizenship is also strictly linked to the issue that we are talking about today, which is the immigration question, the immigration problem. So, equal opportunities goal, which is an important purpose, in favor of different social segments, in favor of a very equal society, is at the base of this concept. So we have to understand that we have to think to citizenship as something very complex, which is not to have just a passport, you know what I mean, not just the juridical meaning of the citizenship, because this is the realm. This realm is where the realm of citizenship is where the inclusion and exclusion processes take place. So we have to think in a. I just told to the chief of the college that we have to face immigration and then citizenship with a multidisciplinary approach, because this is the only way to understand the question, the only way to better understand the problem. Global society over this historical period, this historical phase, is facing various but important situations of crisis. I mentioned that in the title of my speech. And there are actually maybe 3 different crises strictly connected among them. In particular, there is a crisis on the realm of the social identity. We are living in the postmodern world. We are living in the globalized world. So there is a problem, I could say, on the identity, social identity of people, because many things are changing, maybe too fast. We are losing our traditional points of reference. So identity is strictly and directly affected by this process, this global process. On the other side, there is another problem, which is concern the crisis on the political realm. This means that political and institutional domain is stressed by globalization. And modern democracy, especially representative democracy, are in crisis during this phase. Under many points of view, I'm going to be back later on this point. And there is, of course, we have mentioned today about the economical and financial crisis, the big global crisis that you are facing since 2008. So this is another problem which interlaces the migration crisis and then the migration contest. So, just a few words about these three crises. The first crisis, the first scenario concerns the idea of the global citizen in the postmodern era, that is the liquid society, according to Bauman's view. So it refers to the sense of these global citizens, the sense of loss, the sense of loneliness in the frame of the risk society. Anxiety, fear, we were talking about fear first. Anxiety, fear in a modern society. Societies characterize the perspective of this type of citizens, the global citizens. And it mirrors the uncertainty of the society itself and affects the behavior of citizens. For example, the mistrust towards immigration and migrants as well. We live in the uncertainty society according to the idea of Giddens. Giddens talked and wrote a lot about this kind of society. But at the same time, the idea of the risk society is connected to the social perceptions. We were talking first about social perception. I'm going to show you also some data. It will be very interesting to see the difference between the reality and the perceptions on the same problem, on the same question, which is migration. I'll show you some slide about that. And then the risk is strictly associated to the presence of migrants in our territory, in Italy, in Europe, and maybe also in USA. So the process is conditioned by the perceptions of the people, by the public opinion. Also because, I want to anticipate something, also because parties follows public opinions. Sometimes they had to lead public opinion, but most of the time they follow. Especially populist party talk about in a particular way about this problem, and then the rulers follows the public opinion, their fear and their idea about the migration. Let me go briefly to the second point, to the second crisis. About the political and institutional sphere, representative democracies are living a moment of very intense and wide delegitimation. This is another big problem, because this problem belongs to the frame which is very important, for example, for policy maker. And if this is the frame, the policy maker has a particular difficulty to go on deciding, and then to face problems like immigration. So, delegitimation is a very big problem for a political system, because this sentiment is the base of the exchange, I would say, between citizens and the political system itself. If you don't believe in the political system, in its institutions, in the values that it transmits, so how can a govern to lead and to govern a problem like immigration? This is another big problem. Delegitimation actually is a sentiment that is not so much for democratic principles. Democratic principle remains very broadly recognized among people, by citizens. But this sentiment is orientated towards how democracies work, and sometimes towards the inefficacy of democracy, especially when democracies have to face problems like immigration. But not just that, of course. There is a lack of responsiveness, which is another important point to take into consideration. Critical attitudes is typical of modern democracy. Citizens, critical attitudes, but also distrust towards the institutions. And the anti-political sentiments are so widespread in Italy, and not just in Italy, but also, for example, in Europe, and in many Western democracies. Not just mistrust and critical attitudes we can see, but also anti-political parties, which are important actors who play an important role inside the political system. Try to think, for example, during the electoral campaign. This is a very important moment where this kind of actors, political actors, I call them entrepreneurs of the social alarm, they play a very important role, and they condition the activity of the ruler. In this frame, we can see doubts, for example, towards Europe, towards Europe institutions, European Union institutions, but also the project itself of the Europe. And this is another big problem, because Europe could be the leader institution to face this problem. But Europe now is having a very low level of trust from their citizens. And this is a big problem. If an institution loses its support, how can this institution work in a good way? How can be free to decide in a long-term perspective? So this is a big problem that affects the question of migrants. So all of those indicators are clues, actually, maybe not trials, but clues about the fact that modern European democracy, new and old democracy, not just in the old Europe, but also in the new countries, the new democracy in the East Europe, are running a road not so in line with the political integration path. So we have to take clear in mind this point. It is briefly, I'm going to say, this is briefly the scenario in which the migration crisis can be framed. And then we had a lot of clues from the interview and then from also the participants in our panel. And we can say that the migration crisis is right now in the center of this scenario, this very difficult and I could say delicate scenario, is a stressful event in this scenario, and it touches the three facets of the concept of politics, namely politics, policy, and polity. What is politics? Politics means ideology, means conflicts among the political actors, where there are the famous political entrepreneurs of the social alarm, for example, populist parties or populist leaders. Policy means to take decisions, means to face a problem, means to build a project, means to have an idea of the future. But to face a crisis, you need a lot of resources, like, for example, trust of the people that you govern, for example. Polity, the third facet of the politics, means community, means identity, means territorial borders. You know that Schengen is in crisis in Europe. They are building walls, maybe everywhere in the old democracies and in the new one. We have a very big problem about this point. Also because borders are not just objective borders. Borders are also symbolic borders. And polity is something that, okay, it has a border, a concrete border, but it's also something strictly linked to the idea of the identity, the sense of belonging. Europe was different a couple of years ago than now, in our perceptions, because there was Schengen. Now Schengen is called into question. It's called into question. We mentioned the border between Italy and Austria. They are building a wall. They can't stop anyone, actually, with the kind of a wall, but can change the idea of the polity. They can change the idea of Europe. And it also affects, for example, economy, because it costs a lot of money to cross a border. There were not a border until maybe it's not. There is not a border as well, but so things are changing. So the idea of the community is changing. In other words, polity refers to the idea of a political community, and if you change the borders, you change that idea. Third and last point, just briefly, it concerns the economic dimension, and then the global financial crisis. It has had consequences in everywhere, actually, at global level, but also we could see repercussions in a European level, also in the single country level. Austerity has been the key word for European policies for 10 years, for almost 10 years. And you can imagine that in a frame like that, it's very difficult to accept new people inside our borders. You know what I mean? We were talking about this later. So the situation is becoming more complicated concerning the integration process. And this is a big problem to face in a good way the question of the issue of the migration, and in particular the migration crisis, because we have not to misunderstand the immigration phenomenon and migration crisis. One stress the other problem, but there are two things a bit different, two events a bit different. Public opinion, which is an important actor in the modern democracy, is strictly deeply touched by this situation. The social sentiment towards migrants could change, and not in a way in line, coherent with integration, with a high-quality integration process. Skepticism, caution, could be located at the bottom of the migrants' social perception. I'm going to show you some data later on. So the migrant crisis doesn't help a perspective of integration, a perspective of high-quality integration, and make harder and more complicated this situation at a crossroads where the three crises I just mentioned above interlace themselves. It is possible to see the consequences at global level, at European level, at also single country level. I'll show you something about Italy. In that context, it could be very interesting to understand whether and eventually how the relation between citizens and migrants has changed. I will show you some pictures, very easy to read, but because are very interesting to have a look. Italian case, it's very important, I think, to understand that problem. For different reasons, I don't want to stop on this point, but it's very important, believe me, trust me, and it's very important to understand what's going on in Italy, because you can understand many things that is going or we are going to go in Europe, for example, in the next future. So, citizenship is actually a process of inclusion and of a person into a community. In a broader sense, in a very wider sense. Citizenship was born next to the idea of democracy, and democracy is based on important values. Usually the idea of citizenship's right refers to the juridical meaning. Actually, it is very important, face it, but it's just a part of the story. In fact, one can have a number of entitlements, but you can have rights, even though you have not acquired the citizenship of a particular country, maybe the country where you live. So citizenship is something very, very important and very complex. So this is to say that citizenship is something that goes behind the juridical dimension. But citizenship is something that must be framed in the domain of the political culture, so values and the sense of belonging. This is a way to enlarge the borders of the citizenship, of the concept, of the category of the citizenship as well. So, migrants are in the center of this crossroads, and they push us, the people who had to give hospitality, for example, Italy, which is the frontier of Europe in the south, or then in the Mediterranean Sea, and citizenship goes behind the nationality, the idea of the nationality. It is strictly linked to the idea of the community. Citizenship can be considered also as a belonging to. It must be considered a question of belonging to, through which a community of citizens, belonging to a community. In terms of affective citizenship, you have many American scholars who have studied a lot of this dimension of the citizenship, like Coleman and Bloomer, for example. Affective citizenship is important as well, not just entitlements and obligation, not just personal liberty and so on. So sense of belonging. I want to stress on this point because it's very important to be part of a community, but also not to be in a juridical way, but also to feel part of the community. And this on different perspectives, from the natives on one side, but also from the migrants on the other one. So, in particular in Europe, things don't go so well on this point, until this point of view. Today, this process suffers of the consequences of ascribable to the crisis I mentioned above, economic and so on. The traditional internal equilibrium of the European continent has been now called into question. I show you now some pictures. Not just Schengen, but also, for example, the idea of the presence of the immigrants in the territory. Have a look at this important research. Research was made by Ipsos. 33 countries were studied, And the question was this one, what percentage of the population do you think are immigrants? And the real presence is 10%, but people say that in average, the 33% are the percentage of the presence of the immigrants. You can see, for example, in the red arrow, the data of Italy. Italy, there is an overestimation of plus 17%. We have 9% of immigrants in our territory, but people says that, on average, that we have 26%. It is the average guess of this presence. I put a circle in other European countries, like France, Germany, Belgium, Netherlands, Great Britain. I want also to remember that next June, UK is going to vote for Brexit, just to remember the problem that Europe has got. So in this frame, where the distortion is very high, you can imagine that there are political actors that take an advantage from this situation. Try to think to populist parties, populist leaders, that especially when there is an electoral campaign, they talk about this problem in a distorted way, overestimating the problem, and underlining some points that are not actually so close to the reality. We could think to Marie Le Pen and then the Front National in France. We could talk about Nigel Farage in UK and then UKIP, or Alternative for Deutschland in Germany. But also in Italy, we have Salvini and Lega Nord, which he is very active on this point. But also in Eastern Europe, there are a lot of parties that, and also in Northern Europe, there are a lot of parties that are strictly connected to the populist political offer, we could say in this sense. So we can see consequences at every level, European level, but also in the political system and then in the election of the single countries. Just a couple of months ago in Germany, Alternative for Deutschland got 12% of votes. And so this is something that we have to remember. Schengen Agreement is in crisis, as I told you. I have also here a picture. If you have a look at the table, 56% of Italians says that they do with the option of restoring controls at the borders. But it has a reflection, it mirrors in the Italian politics, because if the majority of the Italians says that at the borders you have to restore controls, so a government has to take into consideration this one, also for electoral reasons. Maybe the premier or the minister, so they don't believe that is a good policy, but public opinion is important, electors are important, and we live in a phase of permanent campaign. Blumenthal is an American scholar. He, in 1980, I think, he built this category, the permanent campaign. We are always in campaign. And then there is room for this kind of offer, political offer. I want to go on to give you some other data before to go to the final remarks. This is another point very, very important. About the global and financial crisis I mentioned above, it is possible to see that this is an a trend from 2005 to 2016, and the last opinion poll I did was the first week of this month, so it's very updated data. So about the global financial crisis, it is possible to see that before the crisis was started in 2008, we have the data of 2005, Italian people who responded that immigrants were threatening for Italian jobs were 35%. And the figure shows a slight decreasing of this attitude, of this orientation. It was 31 in 2008, and it remained static during the last opinion poll. So this means that, okay, there is a little bit decreasing, but 1 out of 3 people, Italian people, think that immigrants are threatening for Italians' job. If you think that something is true, you behave as it was true, really. It's really true. You know, this is an important point. About threatening the identity and culture, Italian culture, you can see that the trend is increasing from 27 to 33. And this is another big problem, huh? So it hasn't changed a lot, actually, but 1 out of 3 think that immigrants are threatening for our identity and for our culture. This means that you leave the migration process as a risk for your job and as a risk for your identity. So it's not, oh, 2 minutes, okay. Quickly, this is the trend about the threatening for Italian safety. You can see in the last part of the chart, of the line, that the fear is growing up from 31 to 41 during the first days of April. And this is another important question. Another interesting question is about the refugees. We try to measure the orientation of refusal or hospitality. And you can see that the hospitality grow up compared to the first semester, but during the second semester is slightly declining. So this is another little clue that is not a good clue, actually, for our subject. I show this one because there is not just the public opinion, but we have to take into consideration also media. And if you can see, during the end of 2015 and the beginning of 2016, the portion, the percentage of the anxiety news, I don't know if it's good English, but maybe it's quite interesting to define the kind of news in that way, is now, it was 7.3% compared into 1.5 in 2010. So the anxiety news are growing, especially during the last period. But anxiety news related to the immigration process, to the immigration problem, to refugee crisis. So this doesn't help an idea of integration. And this is interesting as well. This is a line which represents the number of the news related concerning the European Union. And there is a peak in the same period between the second semester, during 2015, and news were talking about European Union, but associated with migration. So, some final remarks before concluding my speech. Citizenship interlaces real democracy and its actors, parties, media, public opinion, and so on. But we live in a situation of permanent campaign. And there is room for this kind of parties, especially populist parties, which touch the argument from their perspective, for electoral reasons. Populist parties are barely talky parties. This means that if you want to build policies in a long-term perspective, it will be very difficult for the rulers to do that. Citizenship and integration policies needs a very long-term process, but it contrasts with the short-term interest of the parties and then of the rulers. So they have to give answer to the public opinion, like the one they are doing in the border between Austria and Italy. The only reason that we can find in that event, in that idea, is not to stop the immigration, but it is strictly linked to the fact that there will be election very soon in Austria. So you know what I mean. The risk is that political decision makers mix up the role of the leader with that of the follower. And it's terrible. That's terrible. If you follow the belly, if you follow the public opinion, you are not a leader anymore. You are a follower. But how can you imagine the future if it will be the perspective that you embrace? So this is very dangerous for the community itself, for the sense of the sense of the community and the cohesion of the community. So it's the idea of the polity which is going to change, which lose the basic idea in which the community is founded and based. Political responsiveness is very important because the rulers have to respond to citizens for the common good, but you have to combine this responsiveness with the capacity to manage a fundamental problem like immigration is. Following the sentiment of social alarm leads nowhere. This is a very big problem. In this case, policies will mirror just the fear, just a situation of anxiety. And you cannot build a scenario, a future scenario, for the future of the citizens, of our children, or for the future of a country. Politics has a huge responsibility, actually, to construct the citizenship in the real sense of the word. But also other actors are involved in this. And the responsibility has to be part also of the perspective of the other actors, such as political parties, such as media system, and of course citizens. Citizens should change, should become, I'm talking for Italian people and then maybe for European people, should become more involved in the situation, more informed about the situation. Because if you are not informed, you are not a good citizen. And then the reaction is the one that we can see. When we see that the lines of the trend we register by means opinion poll is an up and down trend, which reflects the public debate, but it doesn't reflect actually the problem itself, but the representation of the problem on the media. So migrants, social marginality, this is another important point. Migrant social marginality is something to avoid, because if they become self-referential, the migrants could go closer to groups that are violent or terroristic groups. So this is the reason why you have to implement a very important integration process. Paris, this is just an example, Paris terrorist attack is maybe not a radicalization of Islam, but a sort of Islamization of the marginalization of the people who used to live in the banlieue. Maybe they had the French citizenship, but they didn't feel French. So this is a big problem. This is a lack of, on the idea of the affective citizenship. Ruling, this is very important, ruling without temptation to follow public opinion and voting interest. This is very important, very difficult to get actually in practice, but it's a very important to get. This requires that all actors involved contribute with a strong sense of public responsibility and a very strong ethic of politics. But this is very difficult, very, very difficult, because if there is not the responsibility of all of these actors, we don't have a virtuous cycle, but we have a vicious cycle, and the results is mistrust, anxiety, social alarm, and so on. Thank you very much.